Hello and welcome to another exciting journey, Lost in Brazil. If you're new here, I'm Mark, your guide through wonders of this incredible country. If you're returning, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Before we embark on this adventure, hit the subscribe button and join our community of fellow explorers. And don't forget to ring that notification bell. That way you'll be the first to know when a new adventure unfolds right here on Lost in Brazil. Our journey today begins in a quaint little village called Trapiche. Now Trapiche is technically not an independent town. So let's go to examples that you may see in the United States. When you're driving along, you might see the word unincorporated on a city somewhere. And so you're driving along and you see unincorporated because the city or the town does not belong to like a larger city. Like for example, I'll give an example like Sandy Springs, Georgia. That's the first one that comes up to my mind. It used to be part of Atlanta, but they were paying a lot of taxes to Atlanta and getting very few services. So they decided to vote and become unincorporated, which this is a privilege that we have in the United States. You can vote to become independent. And technically, if you're a state, you can vote to become to secede the Union, but we see what happened about 160 years ago when states decided to secede. So it's not always, it depends on, of course, politics, but you cannot do this in Brazil. So Brazil does not have this option. So every single state, every single region is part of a city, is incorporated, is incorporated, it's not unincorporated. And technically in Brazil, you don't have cities, you have prefects. So the mayor of a city is actually called the prefect or prefeito in Brazil. So this is Trapiche, and though it takes about 40 minutes to drive to the to the center of the city of Macae, and it's kind of like the county seat, but to go to Macae, which is a city with about 300,000 people. There was when there was a money laundering scandal, the city went from 500,000 people to 250,000 people in a year. That was a huge drop. So, and it was the scam called Lava Jato, and Lava Jato means car wash. So if you look up, the car wash money laundering thing in Brazil, you can find out more about it. So Brazil is sort of broken up. Maybe this is like the old European style or Latin style in South America or Southern Europe, possibly. Of course, if you go to Louisiana, the districts are broken up into, what's that called? They don't have counties in Louisiana, and I can't think of it right now. I'll think of it in a minute anyway, but it's basically the same thing as a county. So in the United States, you have more levels of government. You have the federal, the state, the county, and the city. Which that one extra layer, it does an incredible amount of increasing your liberty in the United States. So in Brazil, there's only three levels. You have the federal, the state, and the prefect, basically. And of course, each city is broken up into counties. I mean, not counties, but neighborhoods. So they have a stronger bond of neighborhoods. So technically, if you want to compare Brazil to the United States, you would say that the bairro, or like in English, it's the barrio. And New York is an example. You have in New York, you have the boroughs, which, this is kind of the structure here in Brazil. And so these neighborhoods, of course, they're not independent. They belong to the city, but that's the way they break up the districts into these neighborhoods. So you live if you live in a different, you might live in a different neighborhood or so forth, and that's what it is. So Trapiche is kind of like a neighborhood, but nobody would call it a neighborhood because it's like so far out in the middle of nowhere, and it's a small little quaint village with a couple thousand people. And so in Brazil, when you think about cities, you're thinking about maybe 100,000 people, and it's because they're broken into the prefect structure. So somebody might say, well, this city has 200 million people. Well, you have to think about it. It covers a geographical area that has to participate as part of that city's population. So something to take into consideration. So there's a different structure of government. Now, enough with the boring thing. So now this is Trapiche. We're leaving Trapiche, and now we're sort of in no man's land, and we're heading to this place called Serra da Cruz. The R's in Brazil are pronounced like an H. So it's kind of like saying Serra da Cruz, or the mountain range of the cross, kind of, or Sierra of the Cross. And that's where we're heading. So this is a rural area full of cattle ranchers, and maybe a few farms, but mostly what you're going to see on here are cattle ranchers. So this is a nice quiet area. It's going into a box canyon, and you're going to see the mountain range soon. But this goes into a box canyon, and there's really no other way out. I mean, you could take some back roads to get out of here going in another direction, but it's probably going to be a difficult trek. And it's possible, I mean, you can see it on the map, but it's possible that it might go through other people's property. I don't know. So it's probably not, I don't know. It's probably not feasible to take it. I didn't see anything really that great to see, but in reality, this is the way in and the way out. And there's only one way in, one way out. So that reduces the amount of traffic too. And there's a very small population of people. You could probably count everybody on one hand that's in this area. And it's a nice area. It would be a good place to live. Now, one thing about this is there's no internet access here. I mean, there is. I'm sorry, there's no cell phone access here. There is Wi-Fi here in some parts of it, so you can connect via Wi-Fi. But it's only if you are in a place where there is Wi-Fi. Like I went to a festival here one time. It was a yucca festival. Yucca, down here they call it manioc or manioca. It's like a root that grows in the ground. They grind it up into wheat. I mean, sometimes they eat it. It's almost like eating a French fry, maybe. But the French fry is sort of stringy. It's good. I mean, it's good. They grind it up like flour, and when they do the Brazilian barbecue, they put the manioc, the dried up manioc flour on. It's a little bit gritty, but it's good. It's really good, and they sort of mix it with the meat and the vegetables. So, and that's so I went to a manioc festival, and they had like really, really good Wi-Fi there. But and the reason why I discovered that they had Wi-Fi because I saw people using like credit card, because they had like a bunch of booths there, and they were using these credit cards without a wire hooked to them. And I said, well, there has to be some sort of connection here. So I turned on I took my cell phone out and scanned it, and it had the Wi-Fi, and it was a 5G signal, which there's no 5G cell phone coverage in this area. If you go to Rio, there's there might be like one 5G tower somewhere around there. I think maybe a couple, but all around this area, the most that they have is 4G. And a few years ago, they had I would say in 19 or 2017, they had like 3G, because I remember I came from the U.S. with a 4G phone and everything was 3G. Now that mountain range, that mountain range is the one that they refer to, Sierra of the Cross, and it's kind of going into a box canyon, so it sort of curves around. Now there's another town like right on the other side of the mountains. I mean, I would say, you could probably, I don't know, like it's probably about maybe a mile away when you're at the base of the mountain to the town to the base of the mountain on the other side where there's another town, and it's a fairly good sized town. Now, if you have to go all the way around these mountains, and if you drive there, it's going to take you over an hour. So that's to show how big this mountain range is, and it's pretty much impassable right here. So to the left and to the right, there are cattle farms around here. So it's a shame because this view looks good on camera fairly, but it's when you're able to look around, panoramic view, it's much better. And I have a couple of short videos showing some side views. So if you look at my short videos, you can see some other perspectives. I'm going to try to possibly invest in better cameras so that I could get better views of this. And maybe the next time I'm going to use a wider view. And I left the hood of my car in there because this was the best possible way to get the best view. I mean, I could hold it up higher, but the camera was shaking too much, so I had it at this level. And I could have cut out the bottom of the window of my car, but I decided to just leave it in there and try to show as much as possible. And so, this is it. This is view. Let me go on there. You can see a little bit of a waterfall up there ahead, and there are a few of those around here. There's a lot of water sources around here. And one thing that's interesting is, I mean, I live near the beach, and when you look at this mountain range right here, you don't really think, but this is enough to prevent a lot of the clouds from coming through to the beach area. And so, like, within this area, within this mountain range here, they get a lot of rain. It pours down with rain. But where I live, it rarely rains. It's almost like it's dry. And the only reason why there's greenery where I live is because the rivers flow down and supply water to the area where I'm at. But there's usually not a lot of rain coming down, which it's kind of nice, to not have a lot of rain, but you have the benefits of it. But it's nice though when it rains and cools things off too. So there are people that live out here. Now, one of the things about Brazil is a lot of people, they don't have a car down here. So, so it's sort of because of the taxes and other things, a lot of people cannot afford cars. And so you have people living in these areas, the only mode of transportation is a bus. And the bus, I think it only goes like one time in the morning, maybe in the afternoon, and one time in the evening. So people are very limited on, getting in and out of here. So I've seen people, this entire distance, I've seen people walking all the way to Trapiche in order to catch the bus that goes like every couple of hours. So it is an excessively long distance to travel. And so, and this music, I thought this would probably be the best music for this environment. Now, one of the things interesting about Brazil is that country music is very popular down here, American country music. Now, they have their own version of country music, which is, it's a little bit different. Of course, the music that I'm playing is all copyright free because I would, I don't want to, do any copyright violations when I do this. So that's pretty much it. So let me look at some more topics to talk about. I guess I could go a little bit more into the food. So, I was talking about the manioc that they eat down here. So of course, being that this prefect area is actually has the largest or the highest concentration of heads of cattle of any place in the state of Rio de Janeiro. So there is a ton of cattle in this area. Now, being that there's a ton of cattle in this area, so you could probably guess that the beef is the number one thing that you're going to find here. So so you could probably throw a stone and find a Brazilian barbecue somewhere. Of course, they don't call it a Brazilian barbecue down here. They call it a churrascaria or churrascaria, if you want to pronounce the R's. So they're everywhere. So you see the signs, and most of them are good. Now, like if you go to the cheap ones, they will not have what's called, so there's a lot of them that serve by the weight, so you weigh your plate in. So if you go to some of the cheaper ones, they don't have picanha. They used to, but the prices have gone up recently. And so picanha is like the best cut, and I don't even know how to compare that to, because they don't cut that in the butcher shops in the United States. And if you want to get it done, you might have to find go to a some Hispanic neighborhood. If you're lucky, like if you live in an area where there's a lot of Brazilians, I think the Brazilians, what they do is they go to maybe a Mexican butcher or Hispanic butcher, or they might know a Brazilian butcher working there, or they might teach the butcher in the store how to do it and get them to cut that, because it's sort of like a religion to eat that portion of meat. But it's really good. Once you have it, you'll know why. But they if you get that kind of meat, it's going to drive your price up a lot in if you eat at these places in Brazil. So that's the main diet. Now the other thing that they add to that, like if you're going to eat the Brazilian barbecue, the other thing is I think it's called pico de gallo, and what that is basically, it's just there's another name for it. I can't think of it right now, but anyway, if you take bell peppers, tomatoes, you're going to know what it is. If you want to write it in the comments, feel free, because I can't think of the name of it right now. I'm not much of a in culinary arts. But so you take bell pepper, you take tomatoes and onions, vinegar, and I guess vinegar and olive oil, and maybe a couple other things. Mix it together, and that's what it is. So it's sort of a mixture of that, and then they eat that with the barbecue. They put the manioc flour on there with the barbecue, and that's the main thing that they eat. They might have some other things in there, like one of the things that they eat a lot with the barbecue is they'll eat potato salad. So that's a big thing. Now they call the potato salad mayonnaise, just mayonnaise. That was always one of the curious things. I wonder how that happened. So that might have been imported from somewhere like the United States, because a lot of times if they import a language from somewhere else, they're going to shorten it. Like for example, shopping center. In Brazil, they just call it a shopping, because shopping is not a verb in Portuguese, so they don't really use it as a verb. So that's one example. So they say, we're going to go to the shopping. Especially when they're speaking English, they confuse that and shopping. Now, And there are like you'll see words like that are incorporated into Portuguese from other languages, just like in English we incorporate words too, and it may not have the exact meaning, so we might cut it off, or change it slightly or change pronunciation. So that happens, of course. Now, so I spoke about one of the festivals, but looking at these road conditions here, they're for being a dirt road, it's not too bad, but they probably go through this with some sort of a vehicle to level it out once in a while. It's probably worth it. I heard that they're talking about paving these roads, and there's a part of this road where I saw that it had been paved. I don't know what happened to it, and why it happened. That's sort of a. But anyway, we saw some. There's some interesting things out here. So, this is a different road. We were like heading down the wrong road here, and getting back on course, getting on the right track. And this is like kind of deep in the area. You have this small little community here. So this is kind of like a little village within the village. I'm not sure exactly what the name of this is. It might be just considered part. This might actually be Serra da Cruz, but we're going to go further in there to deeper into the place. But this is within this box canyon. This seemed to be the largest community in here. And that's probably it. But, as you go through here, you're going to see, little villages. Now, here's sort of like a little coconut farm to the left here. And it looks like they have a for sale sign, which, I think would be interesting. But, of course, I know nothing about coconut farming. So, it would be, first of all, how would I get to the top of that tree to bring down the coconuts? I'm not climbing coconut trees. So you can see a little bit of a waterfall up there on that rock. You'll see a lot of those in Brazil. It's a very common thing. There's a lot of moisture in the ground, and a lot of water in Brazil, a lot of humidity, so a lot of rain in places, and you're going to see a lot of different types of waterfalls. Now, back in Trapiche, the place where we started, as a matter of fact, where we started, I lived very, very close to the area, and there's an artesian well that was connected to the water coming into my house. So in Brazil, everybody has like a water tank on top of their house, and they don't have water towers in Brazil. So if you're connected to the city, you're going to have to pump the water up into your tank, unless, like for me, there was this artesian well in that town, so everybody was connected to the artesian well, and you could see a spring shooting up. I would say about 20 feet into the air that was constantly like sprouting up. So that was part of the artesian well. I guess it was probably like to release the pressure, so they didn't have too much pressure coming into the town. And I'll see if I can do a video of that sometime. But the water. So one time I didn't have water. My water was in, and I was trying to figure out. And somebody said, "Well, that's not possible." And somebody looked into it. They had to climb up in the water tank. And in the water tank, it has sort of a floater in there, like you have in a toilet. So when the water level gets up to the top, it shuts it off automatically. Now, some places don't have that. You see a lot of people. Of course, you have to have it in Trapiche, because if you don't, you're going to have water constantly pouring out of your tank. But you see a lot of places, people have to fill it up with a pump. They have to pump the water up into their tank. Or if they have a well, they pump the water up into their tank. And usually the way they know that it's full is that water, they have a spout that comes out of it and water is pouring into the street. So sometimes you could have your car parked somewhere and you're going to come back and it'll be washed. Somebody will wash it for you. So you should never leave your windows down if you park in front of somebody's house. But you know, this is absolutely beautiful country. I've thought about living out here. You know, the only problem is isolation, and it could actually be good. You know, when in Trapiche did not. This is the part of the road that I was saying that was paved, and I don't know why they would pave this little strip and then stop. You know, maybe they had the entire road paved at one time and they just gave up on the idea. You know, you have the politics down here. They'll do things, and this is not. You know, I would definitely consider this not a poor area, because the people that live along this area are probably excessively wealthy, because the agriculture industry down here, I would say it fares much better than the United States, because I know a few farmers and they are you know, they have no problems like our U.S. farmers, and they were having problems. I grew up in Alabama, so it's kind of rural. And one of the big mistakes that I think the farming industry did, they became dependent on the banks to give them loans. And you know how the corrupt practices of the banks, sometimes they could default on somebody's loan just to take their property away from them. And you know, you never know. And you know, I'm sure that they word the contracts in a way so it's favorable to the banks, of course. And down here in Brazil, they don't really have that going on. So what a lot of the farmers do is, like I was talking to one farmer, he said he sells his product before he even plants it. That's what he does. He sells his product before he plants it. Now think about that. That's pretty good right there. You know, he already has people. You know, it might be some sort of a note, you know, a guarantee note or something like that. You know, I'm not sure if they actually paid the cash or anything like that, but so the farmer receives basically the money, or he has the amount of money. Now a lot of times, you know, he could probably go to like the co-op or you know, they have co-ops down here. So I would have to ask. I might look into that and find out some more information about it. But basically, he has the money guaranteed, or he has payment before he starts planting. And then, and a lot of things are done like this down here. There's, you know, you always hear these stories about corruption in Latin America, and there is corruption. But when it comes to business, legitimate businesses, and not not politically established businesses, but real businesses that have have the desire to not lose business in the future. There's a lot of integrity with that, and a lot of contracts are done by word of mouth. So the farmer was telling me that he buys his seeds. You know, he gets paid, then he buys his seeds. And I'm not sure how he gets paid, but he gets paid. He buys his seeds. He buys all equipment and everything that he needs. And he gets it done. And he also, said that he only tells people what to do. The farmer does not do the work. He has people working for him. So, of course, there's a different labor structure down here in Brazil. So that's a different thing than the U.S. But there is a lot of labor available for the farmers, and they get it done. So, one of the bad things is that in the rural areas, a lot of the people down here are not part of the governmental system. It's almost like an illegal alien, but they're not. I mean, they're Brazilian citizens, but they don't get paid. Because if you have to go into the agricultural industry, it's not very well regulated. People are isolated. They're distant from the central government, so it's difficult to keep up with them. when you have the structure of government like you do in Brazil. It's very disorganized government system, and they're not very good at what they do, which there's some benefits to that. Of course, there are some disadvantages to that as well. But when you have this system where one of the disadvantages is that you have a lot of people working, and they don't pay like Social Security tax and other things. Now, of course, if they invest their money, that would be better than a Social Security tax. And I mean, to be honest, I think that they should get rid of the Social Security tax and teach people how to invest in high school, which, of course, the government's never going to do that. But teach people how to invest in high school and make it mandatory that you invest a certain portion of your income rather than put it in Social Security where they can use it for corrupt purposes. And so a lot of these people down here, they work, they probably, as soon as they get paid, they probably party, drink their money away. Who knows what happens? And maybe some people do invest it. It depends on the individual. It's just like in the U.S., you're going to have some people that are, that are misers and others that are not. And then they might end up buying their own farm. So everybody does their own thing. But, of course, you have people that, that get into their 40s and 50s and they have nothing. I don't think they have government benefits, when they get to retirement age. So it could be a difficult situation for some people. But one thing to mention about this area, it was isolated. This area was isolated from the main city. There was no bridge, not really much of a bridge to go into the area of Trapiche. So they had to go around and go, head into another area, across another bridge. So that means even Trapiche was sort of ignored. And it's only been, connected with a good bridge for the last 50 years. So if you look at people that are older than 50 years old, they're very healthy. One thing that I thought was interesting is you see a lot of people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s riding around on bicycles. There's a woman, she's about 106 years old. They're not sure exactly how old she was because when she was born, she wasn't registered or, there was no birth certificate because this area was so isolated and rural. And so she doesn't know exactly how old she was. She doesn't know what year she was born, anything like that. But she's extremely, she has no signs whatsoever of Alzheimer's. She's not great at walking around, but she can get in front of a group of people and do a speech about something. And she's extremely lucid. I mean, very, very clear about what she's speaking about. It has a very sharp memory. She just doesn't remember the year that she was born. But, of course, if when you're before the age of 7 or whatever, I don't think you're really keeping track of your years anyway. So this was a situation that she was in. And so I was surprised because you see these elderly people riding on bicycles, but not just like, kind of pedaling along slowly like you might see in the U.S. These guys are like flying down the road on, these rocky roads, riding around on bicycles, doing, going around curves, like maybe a teenager or something. And I mean, they're really, and they're up in their years, like in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, I would say. And so you see this level, an excessive level of healthiness, and you can see there's plenty of food. A lot of people, they have their own chickens. So 50 years went by with connection to the city, but I'm sure the majority of people, they did not adapt to the system of eating processed food, cooking oils, things like that. They're eating, animal fat. So a lot of people, like when they want animal fat, what they do down here is they get the butcher to like maybe butcher a pig, and they'll take a large portion of that and create their own, fat with that in order to, cook their food. and that was because I was wanting some. So the butcher cut like a portion of the pig that had the most fat on it and gave it to me, and he said just to put it in the oven at a certain temperature for a certain amount of time over a pan, and it dripped into the pan, and I had maybe a few pounds of animal fat. So that's the way they do it down here. So these people are like living off the land. They have most people, they have chickens, they have their own vegetables, and that's sort of it. And it's kind of an interesting thing. So this is sort of the end of the trek. Now it goes a little bit further in here, but I didn't really want to cross over this bridge and go over. So this is, I don't know if this is actually considered the town. I think what we passed through earlier was the town. This might be another stop. There's not really much here. I guess there's a little bit of a creek here with an area that people go swimming. So somebody probably, there's somebody that built a house here in front of it. And then there's a bar. And of course, I think one of the first things that go up, town is either, if when you're talking about like the natural event. So now, heading out, but I think the things that gets placed in these, usually the first thing to go up is a bar. And, maybe in some places a brothel, but I mean, that's kind of, I don't know. But that's sort of what you'll see in these places, because I think, I think usually when these kinds of places, if you put up a supermarket, you're not going to have too many people show up, because they're probably going to go to a place that has, you're not going to have enough people to make a profit. But if you put up a bar, beer lasts for a long time. So I think that's probably one of the logical reasons for a bar and not a supermarket. Because, of course, if you have fresh vegetables, they're only good for a day. So if you have 5 or 6 people that show up, you're not really going to be able to sell much. But if you have beer and 5 or 6 people show up, you're probably going to sell a good amount, possibly. I don't know. I don't drink, so not maybe like rarely. So I'll have a couple now and then, but not much. Like I'll put if I put a beer in the fridge, it'll stay there for several months. I think I'm too busy. So heading back out now. This is on the way back out, and there's also another view that's really nice. You see these big boulders here. You can see these coming in, but not to this extent. So throughout Brazil, there are a lot of these. They call them morros, and it's spelled like Morro. And these are these big stones that stick out of the ground. And it's really, it adds a lot to the scenery. It's a nice scenic view going around through here. And they're huge. So it's nice. Let's see, what else can we talk about here? Let's look at I don't know. We can look at crime now. There's not a lot of crime in this area. It's pretty safe. And there might not be much at all. You go into these rural areas, they just kind of take care of their own business. So, when you're not aware of what the punishment could be, you might be less likely to commit a crime. So I'm not sure. There might be some petty theft going on around here, but I'm not too sure. The people are friendly. They're really, really nice, just like any rural area. Usually when you pass people in this area, they're going to wave at you. It's just like, if you're driving through a rural area in Alabama, everybody waves at you, even though you're not part of that area, because they're in such of a habit of waving. Because I don't know, like some of you watching this, you may have never been in a rural culture. I lived in both. I grew up. My first part of my life was in Atlanta. Then I moved to a small town in Alabama. And one of the things that people get in small towns, they get offended if you don't say hello or don't wave at them. So it's kind of like this this thing. So if you're driving on the road, I think what they're sort of compelled to kind of lift up their finger, like raise their double fingers when they're waving to somebody, because so they'll do that to everybody, even though you've never seen the person before. They'll raise a finger at you. It could be. Now, of course, there was this area that I used to drive through a lot, and I bought a car from. So this could be, maybe my perception could be wrong too, but I bought a car from somebody that lived on that road. So he was very well known in the area. So it's possible that maybe because I was driving that car, it's very distinct. It was a red Toyota Corona, and I was 16 when I bought it, but it was very distinct appearance compared to other cars around the area. So that could be the reason why everybody was waving at me too. Who knows? But you do tend to see people waving at you more in rural areas compared to bigger cities. And, they definitely don't want to be offended. Now, one thing that I've noticed is you don't see a lot of wildlife here. You see a lot of beauty, like these mountain peaks and so forth, but you don't see a lot of wildlife. You can hear it. Maybe they're more reclusive. I'm not sure. Also, too, in these areas here, because it's agriculture. If you look at this area from a map, you'll see a lack of trees, and it's hotter here now. I drive through like a forest to when I go from here back home. After I go through Trapiche. And when you go through it seems like the temperature drops about 10, 20 degrees when I go through the forest. And there's no agriculture, no farming through that area. And it seems like the lack of trees does increase the heat a little bit. So, or significantly enough to notice a difference. And, you see a lot of horses, a lot of cows, a lot of people riding horses, but you don't see, there's supposedly, this friend of mine said he encountered an alligator around here. I have not seen an alligator in Brazil. They have these alligators here, but I have not seen them. Now, somebody was telling me, like in the city of Rio, when she goes, she lives in a place called Jacarepaguá, and Jacarepaguá means alligator to the water. And she said she sees alligators once in a while when she's, does her boating, like canoeing or in the lake for exercise in the morning. But I have not seen an alligator here. Now, and Brazil has deer, but I haven't seen any deer around here. Have not seen a puma. Capybara is like the is like in the United States, it's called the nutria. That they had in Louisiana. Some of you have seen those in the South. Now, the nutria originated from Brazil, and the story of the nutria is that people bought this. It could have been a little bit of a scam, but they were under this, suspicion that they could make like fur out of this or something. So they bought a lot of it in Louisiana, but of course it didn't sell. So they let the nutria go, run wild. Of course, that's what happens, and the nutria are now like taking over the southern United States in the warmer areas. In Louisiana, it's where it started. But if you look at there's a Seinfeld episode where like Elaine loses gives a hat to George. George gives it to a girlfriend, and he tries to leave the hat there to come back, and he comes back and the hat's gone. So she tries to replace the hat with a hat made out of nutria, and if you've seen that episode, that's sort of the situation, I guess. So here there's a lot of capybara. They you can even find them in a shop. Actually in Trapiche, There in the store they had there was some nutria in there, and supposedly it's good. You know, it's a high cost item, but people eat it here, and I think people eat it in Louisiana. You know, I think Cajuns in the bayou they eat it as well. So here's some of those like small farms. One of these places is a hotel. It's no longer in business, but there's a place in this area that we're passing right now that's called Hotel Trapiche. Even though I guess it should be Hotel Serra da Cruz, but Trapiche is the name. I think it sort of implies like a what do you call that? I think it's related to sort of a logistical supply chain type thing, or storage stock area. And it's not a word that's used in the Portuguese language, at least today, but it may have been like an old term that was used. And I think the reason why they called it Trapiche is because they did not have a bridge to get to the town. So it was a location where they would move the products to the staging area, and then they would take it down the river. And the river is pretty shallow, so it's probably periodically that they could get the products out of here, when there was more rain. So, now we're sort of heading back into some of the farming areas. So like a lot of these farms, they have these entrances with an overhang on them, sort of a traditional thing. You can see a little water tower on that building. Like if you back the video up, there's like one of those water containers on there. That's what a lot of them have. So most of the people here, they have a well. Everybody has a well. I doubt anyone's going to have any kind of city water or anything. It could be, but so they will pump the water up into their thing on top, and that's how they have their water. I don't know if anybody does that in the U.S. Like I know, I remember some of my family that lived, extremely rural area. They had well water, and I'm not sure how they kept the water flowing. If they had to have the pump operating continuously, or if there was some sort of reservoir up high that had the water. If anybody has ever had anything like in the U.S., please let me know. Leave your comments. And just to mention, like if you're enjoying this video, subscribe. I'm going to have more videos like this, so please subscribe and be prepared for more. So there are a lot of these small bridges here, and they're like one of the things, like when people out of necessity build their own thing, it seems like the quality is much better. They might be smaller, but it's just sufficient enough for a truck to get over. And there's some big trucks, and you see those buses coming through here. So it takes a lot of weight, so it's pretty trustable. Now this is an example of seeing people that are walking, all this distance, all the way down here. So it's a long distance, and very long distance. So this video was pre-recorded, and I'm just going through here and talking about this. But so we ended up giving these people a ride. And because this is a long way, we decided to give them a ride. But you can imagine, you're going to see how far we're going to travel. There's probably about another 20 minutes of driving. It would have been a long distance for this walk. But you see people that will walk a long distance because they have two options. They can wait for the bus, which it's probably going to be 4 hours, maybe longer, from the time that they're leaving, or they can get out in the hot sun and walk. And it's going to possibly take them, I don't know, maybe. Let's see. Let me try to calculate it would probably take them maybe 2 hours to walk this distance. I think this is going to 2 hours walking, maybe an hour. I don't know. we'll see the distance, but it could be an hour. I haven't done any like long distance. Well, I've done a little bit. Well, I've done some, but I haven't done a whole lot of long distance walking since I got out of the Marines. So, and you see a lot of these dune buggies around here too. And I'm interested in buying one, but if you look at a lot of the terrain around here, a dune buggy is necessary. Like I live near the beach, and a lot of people have dune buggies near the beach, and it's there is a stretch of beach that has no houses on it, so you could get on the beach, and you can go riding through some areas that are completely isolated that have no one around there. So it's kind of nice. Around here because you can find a lot of private beaches, private areas that have nobody. Now, with that being said, you always have to be careful wherever you go because you could run into a jaguar down here or something like that. It's probably rare, but if you do, this is the thing. You have to look at when you're doing like a risk assessment. Risk assessment's good, but you have, what's the probability of the risk? And if the risk occurs, how severe is that risk? So if I do a risk assessment, I could probably go, through this area right here, and it's going to be safe. The probability of something happening is really low. Of course, people are traveling by, but if I go hiking off in some isolated area where no one ever goes because Brazilians don't really well, I'll take that back, a lot of them do, but probably not in as much as in the US. But I could go to some rural areas that no one ever goes to, and if something happens, no one's gonna find me. If I break a leg, I'm just screwed. Because you're going to go through an area that has no cell phone coverage. So when you do the risk assessment, what's the level of risk and what could happen? So that's something to take into consideration. Of course, something could happen here, but of course, someone drives by every so often. And so this mountain range is really nice. It's a nice area here. Now, one thing that's interesting about this area is that somewhere around here, there was a Japanese colony. And I believe it was before World War II. Not many people around here know about this. Like in the city, I was talking to someone that worked at a university, a professor, and he knew the area pretty well. I think he might have been a historian, and he sort of mentioned that there was a Japanese colony out here before World War II. But he said that he didn't really go into a lot of detail about it, and and that was before I was living out here, so it sort of captured my attention. So while I was living here, I asked a lot of people if they knew anything about the Japanese colony that was around here, and it drew blank stares from everyone. And so, something to take into consideration is that the people here probably did not, pass this information down. They probably didn't talk about it, things like that. So if there was a Japanese colony, the majority of people didn't know about it. It happened before, maybe their grandparents. You have to think that in this culture here, you have a lot of teenagers getting married. It's not, people are not waiting until, to finish their career in college in their 30s. They're getting married at an early age. And you know, I know this one guy. He was saying, "Hey, you know, my daughter's getting married." It seemed like only a few years ago that, you know, she was like running around in kids. I'm not sure how old she is. I know she's a teenager. She's, you know, she's like, you know, she's somewhere between 16 and 18. But I was sort of surprised because, you know, it's just a, you know, maybe she's even younger than that. I don't know. You know, I was just sort of surprised because I just remember her, you know, just out of diapers a few years ago. It seemed like, of course, it's been like, you know, maybe about, I don't know, 8 years since that time. So it's just sort of odd. And anyway, so you know, you might, if you have like 5 generations, there could have been like 5 generations since World War II here. And, you know, maybe at the most 3, or at the least 3. But, you know, I guess a lot of information could be forgotten if you don't have people studying this in school and other things. So it's sort of forgotten. But like everybody that I've asked that lived in this region, I'd say, "Hey, what do you know about the Japanese colony?" And they were like, I get a blank stare. Like it's something just completely absurd to talk about. Now, so that was interesting. Now, one thing about Brazil, and I mentioned this in my previous video, but a large percentage of the population, especially in Sao Paulo, is Japanese. So, and the other percent, you know, the other major part of the population is Italian, and I think Portuguese. Those are the 3 main things in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo is the largest city in South America. It's one of the probably the top 10 cities, largest cities in the world. And, you know, at one point it was the largest city in the world. So it's, you know, I guess it's constantly changing. But I don't know, I think Tokyo might be the largest right now. I'm not sure. So anyway, you go to, you know, Sao Paulo. Now, in this area right here, the majority of people are Portuguese and German. So the majority of people. So you have a lot of the, you know, you have a lot of this Germanic culture in here. Swiss, a lot of the Swiss came around this area. So not too far away from here, you know, maybe 30 minutes away, there's a place called Novo Friburgo, which means New Freiburg or New Freiburg, which is named after a city in Switzerland, and a city called Freiburg or Freiburg. I'm not sure exactly. I'll have to look at the Germanic spelling. And so this town, they have a huge statue of William Tell, and chocolate and cheese are the 2 main products there. It's really good chocolate. So it's a very, very Germanic culture. You go through these mountains. So, you know, it's like some of the trips I've taken, you see places that have signs in German, like rest stops. So here's part of that paved road again. I think it was semi-paved, or, you know, maybe they put something on here because if you look at this curve and the way this road is, maybe it gets washed out a lot. So that could be one of the reasons why it's a little bit different than the others. So you can look, you can see the mountain ranges here. This is going out, but you can see how everything goes around. It's a box canyon. If you look at it on the map, you can see like everything is closed in around here. Now you can get through some of these places, but a lot of it's just going through somebody's property. So you're gonna get to a gate and you're not gonna be able to get through there. But there are a lot of passages through here. It's an interesting place. It's very, very beautiful around here. It's a good place to live. You know, if anybody would want to retire, you could build a place, you know, somewhere in one of these mountainous areas, some of the areas where there's more trees, and it's going to be nice and comfortable. Plenty of water. You know, if you get a well, the water's gonna be pretty good. Of course, for drinking water, you know, you might need some filters or some sort of purification system, but there's plenty of that down here. A lot of technology down here. It's not completely isolated, but when you're looking about infrastructure, infrastructure is what lacks down here. As far as technology, you can encounter the same technology down here that you can in the U.S. In some cases, it might be more expensive, and some things are actually better down here. I'll talk about that on a future video. But sometimes you can encounter things that are a little bit better down here. Now, I was told that the suspension system on cars down here are better or stronger than cars in the U.S. because the roads are so bad. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. You know, maybe it is, because I guess if you do have rough roads, you're going to need a better suspension system. I did have to, like, one of my shock absorbers was blown out, and I think it might have been on this trip with the load of people that I put in my car, going over the rough roads. But I had to get that fixed. It wasn't, you know, that bad, but I'm not sure if it was one of my shocks or what, because, you know, of course the mechanic spoke in Portuguese, and I know like all the parts of a car in English, but as far as Portuguese, I didn't bother to look it up. I might have to look it up and figure out what it is. But sometimes those things don't translate exactly the same either. So if you see those trees ahead, and we passed those trees earlier coming in, but that right there, that's eucalyptus. So they imported a ton of eucalyptus into Brazil, and you can get a lot of wood. You know, a lot of times you can buy some wood made from eucalyptus. And, you know, especially like charcoal, they seem to do a lot of charcoal from eucalyptus. It seems to have a good flavor to it. But, you know, they do grow a lot of it. Now, the bad thing about eucalyptus is it takes a lot of resources out of the ground, especially water. So if you plant too much eucalyptus, it could dry up an area. Of course, this area gets plenty of water, so it's probably not a problem. But this is, you know, this is heading out of Serra da Cruz, going back towards Trapiche is up ahead. And, you know, I had lived in this area for a long time, but I had only traveled this road a couple of times. Now, since I moved away, I've traveled this road many more times, just sort of sightseeing, going, you know, riding around. But, you know, you see a lot of people on horses, riding horseback and other things. It's just something you see a lot of down here in Brazil. Now, I have another video where you're going to have like tons of people riding horses, and that's going to be in the future. I'll have a short video appearing soon, so, you know, subscribe if you want to. But yeah, here's some more people that are walking. Of course, I'm at a full load right now, so I can't take any more passengers in. But, you know, you have this this culture down here, and so you have tons of people riding. You know, of course, this is the day of the Yucca Festival, or the Manioc Festival, and that ambulance. Now, when they're riding like emergency vehicles down here, police, ambulance, and everything, they always have their lights on. So that's one of the things that is kind of irritating, because I'm used to the U.S. Like, if you see an emergency vehicle coming up behind you with the lights on, you have the habit to get out of the way, or you know, maybe you're getting pulled over too, but you're always in the habit to pull over. Now here you see emergency vehicles, and they're riding along with their lights on. But the only time that you should get out of the way is if the siren is going. If the siren's not going, it's pretty much treated just like another car. And it's sort of it takes some time to get used to it. But like the other day, you know, I was driving down the road, and I could see a, you know, maybe it was a police car coming up behind me. I could see the lights flashing, and it's sort of like a, you know, a jerk reaction where you sort of get that, you know, uh-oh. But of course, it's nothing. And you see people all the time. You see people breaking the law in front of police, because people drive crazy down here. And I know what the laws are. I had to study the driving book down here, so I know what all the laws are down here, like every driving law. And you see people breaking them all the time in front of the police. and they don't do anything. You know, they don't care. They're not worried about that situation, which is, in a way, it's kind of good, but in a way it creates people drive a little reckless down here. But once you get used to the method of driving, the method to the madness, it's not too bad. So once you get used to their mad driving, it just becomes a normal part of it. And I don't know, they might say the same thing about people in the U.S. I don't know, but usually Brazilians say that everything's like really organized in the U.S. So maybe not. But this is basically where I lived for a couple of years, and look at the view here. I mean, it's just a absolute. You wake up in the morning, look out the window, and see this. I mean, it's just a absolute, magnificent view. I mean, you can't really beat it. Looking in all directions, one direction you see cattle, another direction you see cattle, and then another direction you see these mountains, and like you see mountains behind the cattle. So it's just a great view. So no wonder people sort of built this community here. This is a fairly popular community, and it's not cheap compared to a lot of other places as well. So it's a little bit pricey to live here, but compared to other places, it's if you look at the dollar value, you could probably come down here. If you wanted to retire and move down here, you could probably pay, I don't know, maybe $200 a month and live really well. Live for for the apartment. You could rent an apartment down here for $200 a month, $200 a month. And it would be expensive for the local community, but cheap for you. Now you could probably, you could probably rent a nice house for a couple $100 a month, maybe $300 a month. You could rent a nice house and live well down here. So it's a good thing. It's not bad at all, and I would recommend it. But of course, there are some good things, but if you would come down here just cold turkey, it would be difficult to adapt to the situation. So I would definitely recommend looking into something for a long time, very good, before you actually do it, because people, a lot of people come down here and they complain about the situation, and it could be rough in some areas because there's certain little things that might be odd that would be difficult to get used to. So that's it on the video today. So I hope you enjoyed it, and make sure you subscribe if you want to see more, because I've got more videos coming up, and I'm going to get a lot of stuff. And if I get a lot of, this is my second video here. So if I get a lot of videos, I am going to do much more to do this, because this is something that I've been wanting to do, is share videos. Main purpose of doing this was to show videos to my friends and family, but I think it's a really interesting culture down here. A lot of things that I saw are very interesting, so I'm going to pass this around to other people. So if you're interested, subscribe, and there will be more, and I'll put more insight about what's going on down here in Brazil. Thanks for watching, and take care.